Hi everyone. Once again, this is Or This. It is my Monday morning quarterbacking of my sermon, so to speak. The chance for me to talk a little bit about some other ideas that I thought about throughout worship on the theme for this previous weekend. Something other than what I preached about in my sermon. This is for the weekend of October 4th, already in October. And the main scripture that I talked about in my sermon and that I'm going to reflect on for now is the gospel, which was Matthew chapter 21, verses 33 to 46. It was a parable about a landowner who planted a vineyard and put everything in it that needed to be put in to grow the grapes and to use the grapes to make wine and everything that is needed, and then leased it to tenants who would not give the landowner the fruit back when the landowner sent slaves first and then slaves a second time and then his son to collect what was rightfully his. It was a parable that Jesus told in the presence of the religious leaders of the day. It's a continuation of their confrontation after Jesus overturned the tables at the temple, and the religious leaders questioned by what authority he did that, and by what authority was he teaching in the temple, because they were the ones who were supposed to have the authority over the temple and the practice of the faith at that time. Now, in addition to this, the scripture for today, we also commemorated St. Francis of Assisi. Today is his feast day. And St. Francis, in addition to being known for his care for creation, is also known for starting the Order of the Franciscans, and their focus is on taking a vow of poverty and charity. And I found it to be an interesting, I certainly talked about the difference between someone like St. Francis who did not lay claim to anything, and the example in the parable where the tenants laid claim to something that wasn't theirs. But in thinking about Francis and specifically about the religious leaders that Jesus talks to in the gospel today, I also find another interesting paradox, I guess you could call it. So Francis took a vow of poverty, and he didn't lay claim to anything in his life other than his ministry to follow the example of Jesus, not build up possessions or money or anything like that, and to focus on proclaiming the gospel and preaching. The religious leaders, on the other hand, the problem, Jesus overturned the tables in the temple because there was some unjust practices with buying and selling and changing of money going on in the temple, which was overseen by those religious leaders. And Jesus overturns those because they are not in line with what God represents, or any of the ways of God. So you have Francis, who takes a vow of poverty in order to focus on ministry. And you've got religious leaders who are called to ministry, called to facilitate the faith of God's people there in Jerusalem, and to help them. That's why they oversaw the temple and the practices, to help them to continue to learn about God and God's relationship with them. But they instead used their position to build up wealth and build up their power, and they were allying themselves with the Romans so that they could gain more power and hold on to their power. As long as the Romans were okay with them, they could continue to exert power over the people. And by doing this, by having this kind of life, by focusing on building up wealth and reputation and power for themselves, it completely distracted them from their actual calling, which was to care for the poor, help facilitate the people caring for the poor in their community, supporting the poor in their community, and remembering the Lord their God and the relationship that God had with them. And so Francis has nothing to get in the way of his preaching and teaching. The religious leaders who are called to preach and teach let all kinds of earthly things get in their way. And so I wonder, I ask, what should we take from this? What can we take from this idea? And it kind of leads us into a stewardship focus a little bit of the fact that it's not bad to have stuff, but when our focus is on building more stuff and wealth and gaining more, that can take away from our purpose to which God calls us, which is to care for our neighbor in need with what God has given us. And so I think this is a good reminder for us. Sometimes when Jesus is talking to religious leaders, the general folks like you who were sitting in the pews in worship or whatever, you kind of think that this is separated from your life. Maybe it's just for religious leaders like me, but anything that Jesus teaches the religious leaders in that day applies to members of the church today, whether it be, certainly it is for religious leaders, but is also for all who represent Jesus, who follow Jesus. And so this is a reminder to us to not get distracted by the desire to build up for ourselves wealth and possessions, because those things can get in the way of the ministry to which God calls us, just as it did for the religious leaders. And so we give God thanks for the example of St. Francis. And we may not have to take a vow of poverty, but we can certainly remember that all that we have is not, all that we have in life isn't what the goal is, not to accumulate stuff in life, but the goal is to use what we have in life to help our neighbors in need and to share the good news with others. So thanks be to God for the gift of St. Francis, and thank you for tuning in this week. God bless.